Um, so to start us off, first off, welcome everyone. It's great to see you all out. I know it's late on a Wednesday night, but you know, at that point, what better time to just relax and listen to some poems for the evening. So in terms of how this event's going to run, I'm going to go ahead and open us up. I'm going to pass it on to Matt Urmy after about 15 minutes, and then Kristi Maxwell will close the reading section out. After that, we'll take a few moments and offer up the opportunity for anybody who is interested to ask questions. The best way typically to do a Q&A from what I've seen is to have folk type their questions into the chats. That way the questions can be answered in the order that they come. We don't have to worry about people talking over each other. So I will ask that unless there's some problem with doing so, if you would please keep your microphones muted throughout the entirety of the reading. You are welcome to have your cameras on or off. That is entirely your choice. So to lead things off, again, welcome. My name's Andrew Najberg, and I've been teaching at UTC, University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, for 14 years, and am now eagerly awaiting the arrival of my first full-length collection of poems, The Goats Have Taken Over the Barracks. And I don't have a copy to hold up for you all, but I do have the actual cover of the book. So that's the image to look for if you have any interest in it. I do also have a chapbook of poems entitled Easy to Lose, which was published by Finishing Line Press in 2008. And Finishing Line Press is also the publisher for my new collection. So I'll go ahead and start off. I'm going to read some newer poems. I was telling Matt about this before we get started, but I was participating in a postgraduate workshop with some of my former colleagues from Spalding, and I'd submitted poems from a current collection in progress called The Sickly Tree, and they read through them, and one of the main comments I got back was, these are wonderful pandemic poems. You know, we can really feel the isolation, you know, and the darkness in the town. And I was like, well, that's really cool, but I wrote these, you know, over the last 5 years. And so I was like, you know, I guess my life, you know, looks like quarantine a lot of the time. But anyway, so I'm going to read a couple poems out of the new collection I'm forming together, and then I'm going to shift the focus over to my forthcoming collection. So this first poem is called The Glory of Now. And I will say that I am an aficionado of Florida Man headlines, and I was actually surfing a Florida Man headline website when I got a distressing call or a message that precipitated this poem. The Glory of Now. In one eye, a collage of Florida Man headlines, like Florida Man arrested for practicing karate on swans, and in the other, an old student with whom I haven't spoken for years, fearing a mutual acquaintance to whom I haven't spoken for even more years, might be a suicide risk. On the TV, a bad remake of an old, bad movie. In the middle, the screen this poem inhabits. None of them know how often I minimize the others. Meanwhile, everywhere someone seems unaware that they're abusing something. I'm unsure of my crime, but no doubt I must be committing one. Everything untainted has been measured into glasses and used to play a symphony with silverware. There is a video on YouTube. It plays after the one about Central African violence, but before the one about the information paradox. Giving the world a voice allows your urgency to fail to become viral. It's okay, though. We can help each other remotely in ways we've never before imagined. White masks on elastic bands and non-latex hypoallergenic gloves become wholly unnecessary once we fully abstract human assistance. After all, binary is of one and not one. We don't even need to make eye contact. Compassion feels the same in your hand as clickbait and a link to pornography. They're all, They're all forms of instant gratification anyway. And now we can elate ourselves by consoling 1,000 in spirit in the time it once took to seek out a single wounded soul so that we don't have to build a relationship. Take comfort, though. Somewhere, there still remains someone without a screen to bellow through. They don't know wires or signals or contacts. Maybe they live in a place where dust coats the cookware. One must hike more than a mile to wait in line for water. And you never stop hearing the buzz of insects. Maybe they brew teas from local flowers, spend their evenings mending jackets with 3 different sizes of needle jutting between pursed lips. And they spend hours in a creaking porch rocker, envisioning better fences and the fortunes they will bring. It could be they were born with 3 fingers on their right hand, and the thought of that malformed hand on the side of a breast disgusted their mother out of nursing them. And this left them prone to newborn maladies that pressed their fingerprints into all the early phases of their development. I'm letting myself get carried away with it, I know. As I pour coffee and search for clean spoons and a conscience just dirty enough to be human, I can't even say for sure that I've helped myself lately or that I've lived anything more than yesterday's scripts. But right now, the kids and my wife are asleep. I check on them and their nightlights and find that their blankets rise and fall here and anywhere I look from the windows. Down at the bottom of the hill lived the woman who tried to run her family over with her SUV over some trivial domestic squabble before she barricaded her home against the police. I thought I saw sugar in the cabinet the other day, but now I am uncertain, and there is no doubt that the glue traps in the basement are full. The movie hasn't stopped. New headlines are in. No one has died, nor are they the wiser. Already on the counter, my forgotten drink. Somehow, my thirst too. And this is called The Things You Need to Know. You really do want to have hope, to believe in the sanctity of angels, the intercession of saints, that were your children in need, someone might proffer bread, that miracles are more than quantum phenomenon. Just one state over, someone found a dead baby in the blue camping cooler off the side of the road by a speed limit sign. Glimpse the depth of human cruelty and know that you witnessed was unlikely the first occurrence, because we learn early the skill of concealing one's shame. Just the week before, it was a couple who partied for 36 hours while their children died in the car. They said on camera it didn't even occur to them it could happen. It helps to blame it on snakes in the garden, but your children are too real to allow such grace. You know that as a human, something monstrous lives in you, a capacity to choose to dash your soul on the rocks. Side by side in bed with your wife, the ceiling fan turns and the shower drip, drip, drips. The blanket is too hot and the air too cold. The dog turns circles in its bed. Tomorrow, again and again, you will be more than that. And this is why you don't want the gates open. In paradise, it rains and rains until the mud runs rivers down the streets and sweeps mailbox posts from driveways. In the dark there, you can always hear the song of the waters through the still curtain and the double pane. Piccolo drops from eaves the bass moan of heavy flow. Somewhere, tires grip asphalt. A siren cries for the wounds it races towards and those who it will leave to mourn. The secret, of course, is that all floods must lead to flotsam, to the bobbing of the dead face down in the still spots. We couldn't be more water and remain ourselves, but somehow our skins keep it out like Ziplocs. One day you could walk the water's edge. If you follow far enough, a vantage will come eventually. For now, squirrels on the roof, branches that blow free from trunk that clatter on shingle. You never need to ask twice, what was the sound of a tree falling on your neighbor's house? You just hope there won't be a splintered crib, that you'll look away fast enough not to know. Okay, so this next group of poems is from my collection, The Goats Have Taken Over the Barracks. Grasping Dust. She beats the mattress on the porch with the chair leg, despite her age and despite the heat. It has not rained on the palms for quite some time, so her roof has not leaked. Yet she knows the clouds that billow from the diamond quilting of the bed are not the dust and sand that settled onto the flower petals and the tile. For 5 years, she did nothing. She touched nothing of his room, didn't sweep the fingernails from under the armoire or vacuum the hairs out of the rug. She even left his toothbrush and razor by the sink in their little blue cup. They say that slept on long enough, a mattress contains several pounds of dead skin, but she knows it's a myth, knows that these types of memories are little more than noon shadows, but she still saved this for last. Waiting for the salt to rust the rails of the garage door, for the little lizards to find each and every hole through the siding, for the summer storms to blow the shingles loose enough that she simply needed someone to fix something, for repair. The big palm in the corner of the yard hasn't had a green frond for seasons, and she's even stopped asking the sweet young neighbor to mow the Bermuda grass. Yes, now she has no choice but to beat a haze that she hopes will almost shape his ghost out of the old bed. Out on the porch, she holds a wet rag up to her nose with her left hand, and each blow jolts through her bones like she awakens again and again and again. All right. This is a poem called Losing You. Still life with crow. Crow with still life. Still life crow with orange blossom vase and cheese plate. Flock of crows, olive black eyes, feathers suspended against the sun, cued on the power line, their bread line. Watch the sidewalk lines flit their wings and ripple down the row. They burst into flight at the close of your front door, a murder of chaos at the murder of silence. The only one that remains cocks eye down at you from the branches of the first sycamore bare from the fall. Perhaps to your untied shoelace, that brown leather worm. Or maybe you are the worm, exposed inside and out, because she left or he died, or you didn't dress your shadows in apparel for the world, and you shudder against the approaching peckings of I'm sorry's and be strongs. You just need time, yes, time to reverse, time to take it all back and give it all back. Your hard soles clop the walk like you're knocking on coffin wood. Too warm to thrust hands in pockets without sweating, your fingers bent in fists even when they're open. When you stop at your car, listen back at the crow as dew drips from leaves to soil, spatters a worm stranded on a root by pre-dawn rain. It will be dead, eaten or dried, blundering its head into the hard wood gnarls. Drop your keys jingling when the ring snags. Coins settle in your pockets as you kneel. The bird no longer has interest in you. All right, I've just got a couple more. This is called Hydration is of the Essence. Check if your long-term plans involve life insurance. If not, order now. Operators await, and you wait too, for the sun to rise over the mesa and cast shadows from scorpions, for the judgment of morning to vex the horizon line with heat distortion. No doubt this desert is merciless, even with pockets full of conviction, body crucified by its own heat. Don't look too long at the longhorn skull. Anywhere you rest your eyes, you don't look elsewhere. Desert snakes strike the ankles of boots, dig fangs into the backs of knees. You've seen shows that dramatize the anguish of the lost, shows with titles that tell you who shouldn't survive, even though they did, even as you watched them drag themselves parched, limped, and scorched into a shitty little exon with little more peel than paint that's faded to the color of thin blown sand, like the memories of the ones who didn't make it. Old Nelson behind the counter, he squints, hovers his hand over the emergency cutoff like he does anytime something is different. On the counter, there's an open can of cha, 2 loser lotto tickets, a 5, 3 ones, 2 quarters, and 37 pennies from the last customer. Sand on all the copper. One of the pumps dangles loose from its hook like a noose. Right, let's see. I think I'm gonna do, I'll do 2 more short poems. This is called Listening to Doors. Wrote this actually while I was in a Spalding residency in England. I've always had a soft spot for this one. Listening to Doors. Concrete stairs to a church. Doors, wrought iron, ornamented, gilded, fading. Is it stained glass or bas-relief that pains the paneling? Who sees through the figures with such a stillness inside? Who is telling the stories what they're about? They, like me, wait for your red coat to turn the corner. The shops across the street are all closed, though their mannequins still parade their shawls and the calls of gulls carry from the river. I could die among this city's colonnades of chimneys and rust-hampered hinges, down narrow brick alleys that caw to the ravens perched on the aerials. Sooty feathers flitter over wobbling aluminum perches, beaks whose squawks sound like help. And somehow I know they won't get it. All right, and this last one is about East Island, where a good chunk of the collection is actually set, but it's a little bit different than most of the poems set on that island. It's a little Mediterranean island in the Adriatic Sea. All that lasts. The maestro wind conducts wavelets into the cove, where they play Celesta on the rocks while goats bleat from the mountainside. Stone walls segment the mountainside, baritones of form that sever figs from vineyards and vineyards figs. Been years since the cistern dried its cement eye on the mountainside, when the rain stopped its applause and my grandfather bowed. Just bones in a casket under the dirt below, where goats bleat legato on the mountainside. Few of the villagers remember who owned the groves, and no one knows who named the cove. So they nod off in their boats to the Sinfonia Concertante and dream of raisins and pits. I say, let the goats bleat, let them lock horns, stamp hooves and cloud the dust, tumble rocks from terraced vineyards, staggered up the mountainside. All right, and that's it for me. I hope you all enjoyed those poems, and want to take a moment to introduce the fabulous persona of Matt Urmy. I met Matt, holy crap, perhaps 20 years ago now, maybe actually like 22. Met him in a poetry class with Dr. Arthur Smith, I believe, a late mentor of mine, and actually an unbelievably large amount of poets that I know. And basically, I mean, me and Matt have been in and out of each other's lives for, 20 years at this point. We did the Spalding residency together. I've listened to him play his songs, God knows how many times at this point, especially at all of those evenings with the Jody Manross band. But More to the point, Matt is also the author of the absolutely astonishing collection, The Rain and the Bell, and the chapbook or short collection of poems, Ghosts in a House. And I do know that he is also the musician behind many, many fantastic songs, and he has recently released a new album, which I would highly encourage that you all check out on Spotify. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Matt Urmy.
Thank you, Andrew. It was all too kind for you to say, and your reading was awesome. It was so nice to hear you read poetry again. It's been too long since we've gotten in the same place and just read poems. Andrew and I, like he said, have known each other, and Kristi, we've all known each other since undergraduate years back in Knoxville when we were all babies. And you know, we used to sit around and just read poems until, you know, we couldn't stay awake anymore, and just sort of get into the language. And I miss those times a lot. COVID has made it difficult to do. This is the first poetry reading that I've been a part of since the pandemic. It's extremely exciting to see a group of people getting together on Zoom just to listen to poetry and read poetry. I'm on Zoom every day, but most of it is for business purposes and, you know, work and then connecting with family and friends. And you know, we hear so much about what's going on in the world, and we see so much of what's going on in the world these days. And you know, to my perspective on so much of it is that, you know, it's so much of the source of many of our issues are consciousness issues, and originate and are born out of our consciousness. And I can't think of anything better in the world than music and poetry and the linguistic arts than to help address some of the aspects of our consciousness that need a little jolt in order to overcome some of our challenges as a society. So it brings me a lot of joy to see people getting together of their own accord just to be around poetry. It gives me hope. So thanks for inviting me, Andrew. I'm happy to be here with all of you. I'm not as good of a poet as Andrew or Kristi, but I do love to write poetry, and I'll do my best to read it for you, and hopefully somewhere in this mess of words, you all will find a line or two that will be inspiring, or spur some sort of inspiration. I think I'm going to start with a poem out of the first little collection that I put out, called Ghosts in a House, that Andrew mentioned. It was back in, I think 2006 or 2007 that this came out. Also by Finishing Line Press from up there in Georgetown, or is it Louisville or Georgetown? I think it's in Georgetown, yeah. And you know, I think so many young poets that find their way to Spalding's MFA program up in Louisville and have the pleasure of being there end up engaging with Finishing Line at some point. And I think it's astonishing and amazing to have an engine like that in a community that is just putting out so much poetry from people of all walks of life into the world. I think that's an extremely wonderful legacy, and I'm proud to be a part of it for what little bit that I am. So this poem that I'll start with is called Lightning Storm. What amazed me wasn't what she said. It was the soft calm that rose in my chest like a long, thick note from a cello. Whatever person, or lightning storm, or ghost of a lightning storm, that put that instrument into my chest, I'm sure I will never sit down over coffee with. But to know now, beyond doubt, that the invisible can connect with the skin, that bones and tightly drawn ligaments can sing like strings from an orchestra as soon as a conductor arrives. This next poem is another really short poem called Two Men. And I find that a lot of the poems I write are short. I have a memory in my mind that I believe mostly is a real memory that actually happened, although I'm not 100% sure. But I was in Knoxville, where I originally met Kristi and Andrew. It's also where I met Arthur Smith and Marilyn Callett, who I studied under in undergraduate years and continue to study under their works. I was in a used bookstore in West Knoxville, and I was crawling through the poetry stacks of this used bookstore. And this elderly woman came around the corner who I believe was real, and I didn't imagine her. I mean, for all I know, it could have been, the ghost of Marianne Moore. I don't know. But this woman came up to me, and she just watched me going through these books and tapped me on the shoulder and said, do you like poetry? And I said, yes. And she said, the essence of poetry is brevity. And then she turned around and walked away and kind of just wandered back off to another part of the bookstore and left me there by myself with that one line. And I thought, okay, I'll take that to heart. And I think it actually happened, although I don't know. It might have been a dream. This poem is called Two Men. My father stared into his whiskey like an astronomer. We were talking about love, and it is wild how some subjects become unimportant when other subjects arise. I told him I loved him, and his eyes became the stars, and I was a child with my first telescope. And then, suddenly, we were just two men sitting at a kitchen table. All right, I think with that, I'll bounce over to more recent work. This short collection called The Rain and the Bell. It was published, I believe, in 2015 or 2016 by a very cool little independent press in East Tennessee called Iris Press. And I was deeply grateful to them for being willing to put out a collection of my songs. I think I'll start with the first poem in the book. It's called A Measure of the Limits. Over the many landscapes of a lifetime, the spirit comes of age again and again. It learns to stand on its head. It learns to recite vows. The more daring of spirits learn to improvise with the athletics of prayer, move through invocations as silently and limber as chimpanzees jumping through the tops of trees in the blind heat of a jungled night. We pass our relatives every day on the street, work beside them, all of us, members of the same family, disconnected by a great and unanswered question, connected by blood that's been spilled over the tablecloths of so many centuries. All the murder, conquest, and revolution cannot be mended by the mere promise of innovation. Yet progress unfolds itself along the avenues of our cities. Time explains itself through small discoveries, one syllable at a time. We are born, we pass on, and our spirits come of age again. This poem, I think I'll read it next, is the title poem of the book. It's called The Rain and the Bell. And people have asked me, what's the bell? And I've never answered the question. I think mostly because I'm not entirely sure that I'm sure, but I do have a sense of what I think the bell might be. And I guess this poem is one of my attempts to approach some sort of understanding of that. The Rain and the Bell. After all these years, I still lay awake in bed, listening to the steady beat in my chest, a tolling bell that calls me away from rest, the night a playground for the winds of its imagination, its hunger for new words. Each year, this ringing song in the ribs learns to ask new questions of my memory. It learns more and more how to survive in the vast and quiet wilderness of my past, seeks to know itself by dreaming of the lives I have not lived, horizons filled by a life's weather seen from the window of a passing train. I hear the echoes, the promises, the pleas and prayers of the life that I have, and the possibilities I have passed by each day. The memories are drawn toward my chest the way water is drawn as vapor toward the sky, forming clouds, bringing weather. Silence waits for music. A heart earns its voice, one encounter at a time, in all the languages of rain. Let's see here. This is a poem. This is a poem I actually started writing in the first semester of my first intro to poetry class with Art Smith back in 1998, and finally found its way out into the world in when this book came out in 2015-ish. So I'm sure Andrew and Kristi are have, whether they remember it or not, I'm sure they've workshopped this with me over the 17 years it took. And Andrew, poor Andrew, probably had to workshop it with me both in undergrad and a graduate program. So it speaks to the beautiful patience in his nature. So for that, I thank you both, and I thank you all for letting me read it to you now. It's one that for some reason I just didn't want to let go of, even though I'm not sure I know what it's about. It's called The Linked Fence. The woman on the train is not focused on what might be traveling through the dreaming mind of her small child asleep in the seat beside her. Only that he is resting now, and soon he will wake, hungry and thirsty, crying for food, and that she herself is tired, living with the secrets of her own appetite. Land separated by remorseless seas, every spirit free within its bondage. Language, the law of our natural ghosts in the dust and sky. Ignorance is often the present gift that gains us entrance to the greatest hollows and tremors, connects the future to history. The woman walks up to the street wordlessly carrying the boy, steadily bearing forward with her silent faith, her body carrying its own untamable sounds. Every word is bound to its insufficiencies, past definitions. She walks silently and disgusted past a homeless drunk as he mumbles up the street. She doesn't know that this man whom she considers filthy will be her son in 25 years. She doesn't turn to watch as he sways off the sidewalk and reaches out for the linked fence, gravity explaining nothing about the way his hand grasps at the air, or how his shadow stretching out into the street seems to be all he has to steady him. This next poem is called In the Public House. In the smoke and the noise, we sit, sipping wine in the windows. We wait for our bodies to believe again that we are free. It takes a few drinks most nights, and there's no way to describe the moment that we finally let go. We turn back toward ourselves and remember that we are canyons with dark rivers cutting through, starlight dancing on red dirt. We come into momentary alignment with that in us which is supernatural. And we forget what it means to forget what it means. Oh, I'll read this poem. This is a short poem about I spent some time living among the Maori people, who are the indigenous people of New Zealand. I've been studying traditional medicine and healing with them for over 20 years now. And there was a period in my 24th and as I spent my 25th birthday, several months down in New Zealand, traveling across the two islands, staying with different elders that were unable to travel to the States, that I could only be with if I lived there. And it was an amazing time in my life, and I learned a lot. And this poem came out of one of those experiences. It's a very, very brief poem, but it's one that always makes me smile. It's called A Good Teacher. Looks like a satellite, the young man exclaimed. I don't know, maybe. Looks like a skywalker to me. What's a skywalker? But she had turned and disappeared inside. Okay. Do I have time for one more, Andrew? I want to make sure that we're staying on schedule. This is another short poem. I'll end with this one. I know you've heard this one before, Andrew, because I know you've helped me workshop it. It's called Cleaning Fish. At that age, I was not interested in the physics of night, the way sleep could lean itself into my body from nowhere. I was exploring my father's thick black whiskers, the weather smell of his flannel shirt, a long bladed knife that hung from his belt. The fish was shiny, but not interesting, until he slid the blade into its belly. Dark red river organs tumbling out like planets. All right. Thank you all. I'll turn this over. I'll let Andrew introduce Kristi. Such a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to get to listen to you read, Kristi. And thanks again, Andrew, and thanks everybody for sitting through and tolerating these lines. I appreciate it very much.
Oh, thank you very much for reading, Matt. That was wonderful. I will say I certainly remember that last poem. It's always reminded me a little bit about that poem that Art Smith always loved to share, Northern Pike by James Wright, when he talks about slitting the fish's belly to a place he wishes he could sing of. Always hear an echo of that, and lovely, lovely lines. So I do want to take a moment here to welcome and introduce Kristi Maxwell. So, of course, I've known Kristi almost as long as I've known Matt, but fell out of touch with Kristi for a little while. But the poetry world works in really strange ways because her name kept coming up. Actually, there was a really odd kind of confluence of events where I ran into Kristi on UTK's campus, if I recall correctly. I think I was there to visit Art Smith or something along those lines, but she handed me a copy of her book, Realm 64, which, the funny thing is I have to confess, I set it aside when I first got it. I put it in my bag and I went back to Chattanooga. And then about a month later, just out of nowhere, we were talking about Meacham with Dr. Jackson, and we were talking about people we might invite, and he said, when you were at UTK, do you remember Kristi Maxwell? And I was like, that's really bizarre because I just got this book from her. And so I actually went home that night and read the collection, and I was absolutely blown away by it. I think it's a pretty phenomenal piece. It was actually the editor's choice for the Sawtooth Poetry Prize. And I'll actually say I've been teaching portions of it to my students for the last couple of years, paired with the poet Earl Braggs, to talk about pieces that are distinguished enormously by their voices. And when I think of Kristi as a poet, one thing that I can't get away from is just how remarkably distinct her voice has always been. Even back when I first met her, her poems always stood out from the poems around her as having something different and unique about them. And I will say she's also the author of 7 collections of poems, including Realm 64, Hush Sessions, which was the editor's choice for the Saturnalia Books Poetry Prize, and the finalist for the National Poetry Series, and then also My, which is coming out, or just came out from Saturnalia Books in 2020. So I won't take up any more of y'all's time, and I will turn it over to the fantastic Kristi Maxwell.
Andrew, that was so nice to hear. Thank you for those kind words. It's special to be reading with people you kind of grew up with, and it's also special to be reading from my new book, My, with this particular group of readers, because this book is dedicated to Arthur Smith, who has meant so much to all of us in lots of ways. So. I'll start by reading a couple of poems from My. After. This was after we moved into pencil drawings of tree houses on stilts, but before the cows grazed in the diminishing field of the freckle signifying our face. This was after a refusal of berries too close to rotting, but before self-consciousness about metaphor. This was after the butter-soaked collard greens, but before we deflated the ache as if it were something reusable and easily stowed. This was after the pimple you mistook for jam and obviously failed to wipe off, but before the last comma, which we obstinately misplaced. This was after the bite mark, but before the tongue. This was after the nosegay protecting the nose from the plague stench, but before the video of the autopsy of the woman with a bra and panties matching your own. This was after lushness, but before lushness. This was after the ghosts caught fire and after their flimsy collage of light, but before the building conceived space and before the hard labor and before the dead men. This was after the green shoe busted and the wool shoe, but before the description of a bus-struck owl. This was after we knew, but long before saying. In memory of the sound of a silent letter. You have your Zen moment, I'll have my brazen one. A ghost's ghost is its H. Teaching it to be my own ghost, teaching you it is our own death that haunts us. Do haunt and hunt share the same root or just the same feeling? Does grass ever tire of being armed with its blade or of metaphor which armed it? It could have been legs of grass doing a synchronized swim routine in the pool of earth into which it dove. I often find myself writing out of error. I love mishearings, I love misreadings. I find them very generative. This poem addresses that. Before, after. The bread king appeared in breaking's misspelling, his rise accidental, and now yays exchanged for yeast. The laughability tempers the tragedy, but does not change it. Language always the jester. What do you think the Cheshire cat's grin was made of, if not the word teeth? It wasn't the word, though T's touched T's to demarcate each tooth in the cartoon mouth. It was the idea and the irreconcilability between the idea and its articulation. I'm going to go back toward the beginning here, read the opening poem, Sea Songs. On a day in which a sunrise embarrasses you because of the way a cloud is handling the sun, an intimacy you yourself have missed, a light touch, a wisp or whiff of hand. You take a photograph, putting distance between yourself and the scene. A wave breaks some news to the shore. It is nothing new, but still. A shell under a layer of sand, a swollen lymph node. When you were small, you thought everything you saw was what you were going to see every time you looked. There are so many things to miss. A list goes here, but the people around you are going on about bacon and pork rind and the ear of a pig, frozen blubber, the smoke points of various oils. You have commercial excess to thank for the dry swimsuit, your second, which you will soon put on, a permissible exit. Let go of your list, like a grudge you punish yourself with, thinking you are punishing another person. The seagrass looks like a great party from here, a crowd with arms, doing what arms do when unconsciously mimicking seagrass, caught up with wind. The tide of each eyelid covers the shore of each eye. There will soon be a man-o-war, showy as a fascinator, but with no head to hitch to, or a great head, a remarkable head, but one cannot imagine, so does not get to see. When you can't sleep, at least there's a sunrise to trail like a celebrity. A tide scrolls up like a news feed, and you still hover over each shell, deciding if you like it enough to take, if you like it enough to note your liking. It might prefer you not like it, might prefer not to leave. A wave debriefs the shore about the larger sea. What has it to say? There's a way to be tenderer, but we've given tenderness away to the language of meat. I'm gonna switch and read some poems that have mostly been written in the past year and a half, I would say. I guess they do have a certain darkness to them. The first two were written during National Poetry Month last April, so that was after we had been, after things had really taken had changed for a lot of us. Safe. I suppose there is more that will destroy me than I've ever entertained. I've been to enough natural history museums to know some teeth are larger than my hand. I've scanned Netflix enough to know the depth of the predator's seduction. I am safe atop the moss in a backyard I no longer visit. I am safe in a number of my memories. Who is to say I am safe anywhere now? I want to re-enter the room of precious stones. I want myself to be considered precious. I hear tell the mosquitoes are back, though none have yet taken of me a fleshy ATM. Blood money. I limit my own imagination when it comes to the violent things others might do. Still, in the shower, I can't help but wonder if staring at the pattern on the curtain and finding the face of a man could result in that man's materialization. And I've been conditioned then to wonder, what could he possibly want but to hurt me? I want the man's materialization to mean something else. Maybe he just wishes to loofah my back, to adjust the water temperature, to survey my dead skin that I myself have sloughed off, asking, how was it being part of a body? How is it being made to leave. Drains always look so hungry, their mouths in that gimme, gimme shape. Eat of me then, eat. Surprise. The most surprising thing is not the recovery of the baby squirrel, so covered in ants. It looked as if it wore a romper of ants when you found it near a Virginian shore. The most surprising thing is that an aunt, an older cousin, or an uncle had been able to talk the cousin's husband out of feeding it to his beloved snake, for whom he imagined it a special treat, serendipitous, its discovery, so near feeding time, and it not yet dead, the pulse being a preference, to feel the life activating your own nerves. And so a deal was made. If it's not thriving in 36 hours, then you can have it. The most surprising thing is not that it thrived. No, the most surprising thing is the quelling of the human animal, so unevenly hungry, using even others' mouths to feed something in himself. I'm going to read a few more pieces. These are pieces from a project I've been working on called Scroll, and it's kind of an ekphrastic piece where I've been translating my Instagram feed into poems, I guess to justify the practice of scrolling and the time. Scroll, or so of our century. And if the body is nothing more than bone's echo, holler, bone. But we know an echo is not an answer, even if an affirmation. How might you interpret a desire to attend to each other like drones, to attend to each other without context, without war or landscape? Could it be done? The body is, yes, on the verge of yesterday, a rosebush revived. In the aerial view of the wave pool, humans are sprinkles lodged in the icing the water becomes in its breaking. Broken water, broken thirst. That slake contains a body of water from which we would be advised not to drink. That a body can soothe in only certain ways. Among the places one would not like to be, even there one would like to be, to not be loosened from her verb, unless liking being is hard for her, is hard for him, is hard for them. A collection of crude embroideries alongside a masterful dinosaur. Enough with extinctions. Not seeing is a flower or a translation. Fingers positioned so as to be legs with one pant leg on or maybe a thigh high. Anything to explain what's missing. It's as if hair were coming off of her like steam. Such a beverage, tall drink, etc. An ancient watermelon inside of which are spirals of meat and seed. I don't want to bring the space word in as if it were a stray. The live stream at the Cat Cafe tells me today's guests are named after cereal and pizza. I mean, couldn't you just eat them up before saying no, never mind. These are not named after pizza at all. Here's Weston, Easton, Florence. Here's Francis. And this will be the last piece. To eat Elvis, draw Elvis on a cookie, then bite. To eat eyeless men, a cartoonish submarine into which no one may fit. The image is all that needs changing. Slathered in street light, your painted cheek is pretty as snow. The outline you give your eye, as if it were to draft itself. An essay on seeing, the man-made lens, the whole human, in fact, man-made, inside the bright lab of another body. Unfollow the turtle onto whom has been soldered wills. There is a carrot yet to be peeled, a carrot yet to rot, despite a name's smuggling, a speed bump inside oneself. Get over it. To specify goldenrod or canary, to unnarrate a story, turning eye into a slit, other words will sew up. Healing was bound to come. Its little possum nose sewing night into the field, the moon disrobed, just earlier, while I sat looking for the poem. Thank you.
Okay, so first off, absolute wonderful reading, Kristi. If anybody wants to ask any questions, you're more than welcome to do so. Probably, as I said at the beginning, the best way to do so is to ask a question in the chat. That way we don't have to worry about it being run over by people talking, but certainly definitely some very unique and varied material. So I can imagine tons of questions we might want to ask. And I will actually start off with one question of my own, which is one I always ask every poet I run into, because Lord knows it's such a challenge to comb through all the amazing work that's out there. Who are you all reading right now?
This week I'm teaching Harriet Mullen's Recyclopedia. So I've been spending a lot of time with Harriet Mullen, who has always been a hugely important poet for me. I love the constellated reading practice that her work inspires. I find that the fact that she helps remind us that poems aren't linear. Instead, they're going off in a lot of different trajectories.
Clifton, you've definitely got some cold weather. I hope we help you weather through it a little bit. We've had the delightful 1 week of winter here in Chattanooga. I don't know how Nashville and Louisville are faring right now, but it's already back to its normal, like 70 degrees. Spell. You not hear me?
You're back.
Okay. Yeah. What about you? What about you, Matt? Who are you reading lately?
Man, I've have right by the couch where I at night when I'm getting my toddler down ready to go to bed, I have this stack of poetry books that I've been kind of leafing through, but mostly what I've been reading is I've been going back through from front to back the collected works of Edna St. Vincent Millay, and just kind of digging back into some of that that type of verse that I just never write, and really sort of sitting with it and exploring it. And it's been fascinating, beautiful read. I find myself just laughing sometimes when I read it. It's been so fun, but it's sort of a departure from what I would normally, find myself diving through. Like the Spanish poets and South American poets have always had a very dear place in my heart. And but right now it's mostly Edna St. Vincent Millay.
Fantastic. Have you actually the Spanish poets? Have you read Tomas Marin?
I have read some, yeah.
I've been rereading Patient Zero lately, and that's one work I just find consistently just both stunning and inspiring. So that's one of the first ones that comes to mind when I think of any sort of Hispanic poetry. Of course, that and Federico Garcia Lorca. I can't
He's
not
great.
reread him every year or so.
Yeah, I just recently finished rereading the Book of Disquiet, which is one of the strangest books I've ever read.
I love that book. I got to
But
teach that
it's a
not too
good one.
long ago.
Yeah, it's a really good book. But there's so much, like you said. I mean, I you know, more than often than not, I find myself reading multiple collections instead of diving into one singular book. I just sort of pick a book up and read for a period of time, put it down, and the next time I sit down, I pick up a different book, and I'm just trying to kind of like spin my way through my bookshelves as much as possible. But I was going to ask everybody here, you know, if you would leave in the comments, and if I would hopefully have access to them after this to kind of scroll through. But I'd love to know what everybody else is reading and what poets are making everybody's heart throb these days, because I'm always hungry and looking for new poetry to discover.
That's such a fantastic question, actually. Yeah, I absolutely think that yeah, people should go ahead and enter those in. I'll make sure to keep this open because the chat actually will vanish when I close it down. I'm not sure if I can copy and paste. Yeah, I can copy and paste out of it, I think.
Okay, cool.
But
You can
yeah,
save the chat too.
sorry?
You can also save the chat.
Oh, okay. That's actually a feature I like. In our classes, we've been using Kaltura for a lot of our online functions, and so I actually haven't learned how to fully use Zoom like some folk have. So yeah, I actually didn't even know that that was possible. Oh, I love Brenda Hillman, fantastic author, Holly.
I read Loose Sugar last year. I reread Loose Sugar. She's great.
I picked that one up a couple of years ago, actually. I mean, I've had it since I think Marilyn Callett introduced me to Brenda Hillman. But yeah, it's been about maybe 2.5 years since I picked that one back up. It's on the shelves right behind me, actually. But right now I'm just gonna have to dig into that one again. Oh,
Oh, that Forrest Gander book is a heartbreaker. That's the one he wrote after C.D. Wright died.
ooh, I do not know that book.
Yeah, gorgeous.
Thank you for coming, Matthew.
Hi, Matt. It was so good to have you here.
Let's see.
Forrest Gander's also been curating like a poetry coffee series out in California, where when you get the coffee, the bags of beans, you get a poet
Oh,
that accompanies them.
they don't.
That's cool.
They don't just do poetry, actually. I actually had a manuscript in consideration there for quite a while, actually. It was like it didn't pan out in the end, but yeah, that's a pretty cool idea, especially for a coffee hound like me. You know, I spent 8 years working in the Golden Roast coffee shop, so you know, I have actually I went on a random coffee inspired monologue with some of my students a few days ago, and I was like, oh wait, I probably should just stop rambling about this.
Mm-hmm. That's so great. Yeah, because I remember Matt working at Cup of Joe. Man, I miss Cup of Joe. And you're at the Golden Roast. How funny.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, I mean we've made the coffee shop rounds. I mean, we represent the Knoxville coffee scene through you know what 97 all the way through about 2008.
Love it.
I spent a stint working at the Golden Roast, where Andrew worked, but spent most of my coffee shop years at Cup of Joe because they also served Guinness. And
oh, I know.
yeah, so that was my preference because you could have beer with your coffee morning, noon, and night if you wanted to.
Yeah, I downed many Guinness at that level. There was a lot of plenty of evenings that I think I closed that place down with you. So
I tried.
Oh yes.
I can remember one particularly cool night there with isn't that the place where Saul Williams came and performed?
He did, yeah. He performed 2 nights.
Yeah, I remember
Yeah, that was great.
a really cool evening.
I think that was the downtown one. I was talking more about the strip
Yeah, the strip one. Yeah, he performed in the Old City. It was funny. I for some reason I felt compelled to take this book, this biography of Gandhi that I was reading at the time, or that I had just finished, this little paperback book. And as he was kind of finishing up talking with everybody after the first night of his performance, and I was bussing the tables and cleaning everything up, I tossed the book over on his bag. I just figured, I wonder if he would like it. And he came up to me and was really shocked, because he had just started an intensive study of Gandhi's work, and he earnestly wanted to know why I was compelled to throw that book on his bag, and he took it as some higher meaning sign that he was on the right path in studying Gandhi. It was really cool. I said, "No, man, awesome, enjoy."
Yeah, you were his old lady in the poetry shelves. Like, he tells
Yeah,
that
right.
story.
Right.
He's like, I don't know if this really happened, but maybe it did. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that one, actually. By the way, the two men. Yeah, that's one I remember full well. It so nicely encapsulates that moment when people understand their parents to be actual human beings.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. The tension between, I can only really speak to the tension of father and son, the parent of the same gender that you sort of grow up under. And I feel extremely lucky that I'm close, very, very close to both my parents. But there's always, at least for me, there was an energy and a tension, a healthy tension, I think, but a tension between my father and I, because I was this young man in this house with this older man who was leading our family. And it's an amazing tension to explore. I think many poets and many songwriters have attempted to do it over the years, and there's just so much richness there for to sing about. I don't know if you guys know or ever think about the songwriter Mark Cohn anymore. He's the guy who wrote "Walking in Memphis." That's what everybody knows him from. He's an amazing singer and songwriter, but his first album that ever came out, I think in '91, that had "Walking in Memphis" on it, has a song on it called "Silver Thunderbird." And I think of any song I've ever heard in my life, that one encapsulates that tension, and that tenderness inside the tension between a father and a son, and the son's desire to be close to the father and know the father, and the father's, the stretching of the father's attention between what must be done in order to provide for those he loves for, but also be present and be there. It's fascinating, just subject matter. I guess once you become a writer, it's inevitable. Eventually, you're going to have to crack open the subject matter of your parents and your childhood, and we all do that, and we all go there, and it's a beautiful part of the healing journey of the human being. I think is to swim around in those stories.
Yeah, but then that's also the same thing that makes you nervous whenever they buy your books.
Oh man. I'm lucky in that regard that my mom is a poet herself, and so I've read a lot of her writing, so it took away a lot of that awkwardness.
I don't think I realized that your mom was a poet. Does she have any books out, or just?
She's published some essays and a couple of poems in some magazines over the years, but she's never wanted to publish a collection. She just has this ever-growing giant binder of work that she writes. I think for her, most of it was just processing her own life, and being a young girl who grew up in Binghamton, New York in the 50s, and all that comes with that. And so, tell you, it's a wild thing when you're a young aspiring poet to be workshopping your mother's work, in which she's dealing with her own childhood. Fascinating experience, but powerful and wonderful.
At least you weren't workshopping works or poems that she was writing about you.
This is true. This is true.
Outstanding. So what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead, I think, and unless anyone does have any direct questions to ask, I'm going to go ahead and say, thanks to y'all for coming. It was wonderful to have y'all as an audience. And I hope you enjoyed the work. I don't know if you all noticed, but I did post links to books by Matt Urmy and Kristi Maxwell in the chat below. And also they're pretty easy to look up and just kind of poke around what comes from a good Google search. Really, they have so many amazing accomplishments. It's pretty cool just to see what comes up, but definitely check out their books. The ones that I've read are just fantastic. And I don't think you could possibly go wrong with any of their work. I will say, Matt and Kristi, hang on a moment as folk log out. I was hoping we can just chat a moment and talk about, the recording and stuff like that of the video.
Sure thing. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure to see your faces for a brief moment.
Sure, Holly.
If I may say something.
Oh, that's right.
I enjoyed it. This is my first time with a poetry session, so I think it was very interesting. And all of you are so awesome, and you have so much talent, and I enjoyed all your poems. So it was really nice. And my name on the screen is not Larry Skelly. I don't know how that got there, but I have to figure out how to take that off. But I'm Mary Nyberg, Andrew's mom, and I enjoyed it. And next time I'll be a little bit more prepared and see how, now that I see how it all works, it was very enjoyable. I just love it.
Oh, thank you. It's so wonderful to see you.
I love that you're here. I love that this was your first encounter of this kind. How special.
Yeah, very. Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad you made it out, Mom. And honestly, I'm kind of glad the first one you made it to was, reading with folk that I've known for so long. These are both poets that I kind of came up with, I guess you could say. So,
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
And Holly, you wanted to unmute? I think I got you.
Yeah, my camera isn't working, so thanks for letting me talk. It was really nice to hear you all read, and I loved the different voices that you have. My question was in regards to producing a collection. I have found that for myself, the only collection that I've produced, which isn't published yet, I was able to do that with a limiting frame, some confine that seemed to free me into that. And I find it really challenging to work with like the limitless freedom of, that you could write about anything. So I'm wondering if you all have found that you work with confines and frames to help you produce a collection, or just how you bring a collection together. I know, Kristi, that you do some your lipograms that I was seeing and limit yourself in those ways. So I would just love to hear from you all about that.
Do you want to go? I can speak to that really quickly. Yeah, that new book I'm working on, Goners, has been so much fun. Just working with a constraint like the lipogram for the entire time. If you don't know, a lipogram is just writing that excludes one or more letters. And I've been writing poems that take as their starting place the name of an endangered species, and then a variation on a beautiful outlaw that I'm calling an extinction. I don't include any of the letters from that species name in the poem, so it creates quite an absence because of how many letters, just how many words are excluded because of the letters that are excluded. But in general, I actually tend to write more toward, I just write and write and write, and then I start seeing threads and through lines, and that helps me start seeing poems that might have seemed like they didn't necessarily belong together as companions to something larger, often just a thought or a mood.
Yeah, mine's pretty similar. I did have my chapbook of poems, Easy to Lose, which a lot of it is a conversation with small creatures I observed off my porch. It actually was written during a year where I was really isolated. I was living in a fourth floor apartment and I was teaching in Chattanooga. I was a full-time graduate student at Spalding and I was working part-time at a coffee shop, and I was commuting to Chattanooga to teach. So I really was just constantly doing stuff. And so I had no time for socialization. And one night I noticed a frog up right by on my door frame. And I actually named it Archilochus after the first Greek poet who was one of Art Smith's favorites. And basically I just started talking to random crap that I saw. So there's like a poem that starts off, "You Rabbit." That one did have a bit of a limiting factor. There was a really clear thematic content center to it. The collection that I have coming out, The Goats Have Taken Over the Barracks, really didn't start off as a collection. There's two halves to the book. One was a lot of personal poems of sort of personal discovery, especially as I was faced with a number of various losses and major issues, like kind of life crises. And then the other half was me reflecting on sort of my discovery of a large portion of my roots in East Island, Croatia, and surrounding areas. And I hadn't really envisioned a collection of coming out of either of those two groupings, but as I started assembling a thesis for Spalding, I started noticing narrative threads that were running through it, and I kind of shelved it for a while until I realized when I took like a handful of poems out and replaced them with some newer poems I was working on, I felt like I actually had a story that took place across the collection. And so even though it's kind of autobiographical, really, it's actually it's also a largely sort of a narrative construction. And then the new collection that I'm assembling now, that I read from at the beginning of my reading, honestly, I've been working on novels lately, and it's been interesting because it's like this big ordeal to write a novel in a lot of ways. It's like this, I spent like 4 straight months from October till actually last week drafting a horror novel I'm going to be trying to get out there pretty soon once I do some revisions. And, you know, it was this thing like I'm writing this book, and it was like this all-consuming mental process, whereas one day it was actually early in the pandemic. I was going through some of my poems. I was like, you know, I need to start getting some stuff sent out for publication. This was before I knew that my current collection was coming out. And so I started sorting through some stuff, and I really started noticing very clear thematic overlaps and mood overlaps. And basically, by the end of about 3 weeks of opening files and just moving them into different folders, I was looking at what had come out of it. And one of the folders really was just a collection. And I don't even have any clue where that collection came from. Really, it was just, writing one poem here, one poem there. And then just over time, I guess I kept revisiting the same kind of core themes and moods enough that I built a book out of it. And now I'm kind of revising it and getting that ready to go out. Matt?
Yeah, I think it's an important question. And I think I think anytime that we examine our own creative process is extremely beneficial and important. And any time that we're able to connect with other people on how they are experiencing their own process and what they've learned from it is a really powerful thing. And so I think it's a great question to ask. And I think that I agree with both Kristi and Andrew that constraints are extremely, extremely, oftentimes I find in my own life, in line with the furtherance of and the enlivening of creativity and the whole creative process. I think, and I find that to be in writing. I find that to be true in music production. I find that to be true in business. And in my personal life with relationships. It's in music, if you're producing an album, oftentimes some of the greatest albums that have ever been made were made with very little equipment, and the sound that was created and the vibe of the whole experience of the album is really because of the constraints and what they had to work with. And sometimes if you have too much equipment, you end up not ever really getting anything done because you're just kind of wandering around all the possibilities of what might be. And so you miss out. And even if you do get something done, oftentimes that lightning that was there originally is sort of diffused out into the fanciness of all the things you've made. And I try to apply constraints to myself in everything that I do. I mean, if you think about even just like an evening with friends or family, oftentimes some of the nights where there's not much to do and you're really constrained because it's raining and you can't go outside or whatever, it's snowing and you're stuck inside, some of the most memorable things come out of that. And so I believe in constraints and I welcome them across the board and I apply them to myself. I would just make one suggestion, maybe if you're playing around with the value of where constraints fit in your own process and how you value them. I don't always think of the constraints that I apply to myself to be directly connected to a certain style or craft or form. Like for instance, right now, even though I didn't read any of the poems that I'm in the process of writing, I'm working on in the very early stages of a new collection. I think I'm wandering my way towards something. I think it's going to be a collection. I don't know, but the constraint that I've given myself for this phase of this part of the process and the journey is I'm not allowed to read anything that I write until I have completely filled up an entire journal worth of writing. And so I'm spending, I have a pretty tight schedule most days. And so I carry it around with me everywhere I go in the house. And I just scribble things out in little moments where I have a moment to breathe. And I'm about halfway through it, maybe a little more now with the first, journal that I'm working in. And I'm not allowing myself to look at any of it. And that's the one constraint that I'm putting on the process right now. Mostly just to keep me moving forward and not to get caught up in my mind, but to stay really centered in my feelings and in my heart, and not to start editing before it's time. But that's an example of a very simple constraint that has nothing to do with poetic form. But I think it's an important question to think about, and good on you for thinking about it. And I would just say my experience, the best things to do is to test the limits of your constraints and test them on multiple levels in the language itself and just in how you approach writing in general. You could only allow yourself to write between the hours of 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. and see what happens. That'd be an example of a constraint, or only allow yourself to write after you've had a meal as opposed to when you're hungry, or the opposite. There's lots of things you can do to play with to break yourself out of mental patterns and emotional patterns that you find yourself swirling around in as you're trying to break through to something. Because the end goal, for me at least, is always to catch that lightning and to hold it and to give it a place to live on. And it doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't, a vase is a vase. And some of them are really crude and they're beautiful. And some of them are extremely intricate and they're also beautiful, and both can hold soul and spirit. And so however you end up fashioning your work, just make sure that spirit is infused in it, and use constraints as one of your tools to help yourself into that dance.
I would also just tack on, Holly, that I find one of the most useful things when thinking about organizing a collection or seeing which poems ultimately belong in a collection is to print the whole thing out and lay it out and make different groupings and just kind of get that kind of tactile sense of the book too. It's much easier for me to see relationships when they're printed out in that way than I can if I'm working through a Word document or something.
Do you guys do that too, where you print everything out and lay them on the floor, like the whole book, and you start shuffling around orders like a puzzle on your floor? It takes up a whole room. I do that too. Yeah.
I do a lot of
It's
that. The one thing that's really actually for perhaps the most helpful for me is I do a lot of my main editing and revising with pen on the stuff that's printed out. I don't like to sit at my computer and revise. I like to do it a different way than I composed. So if I compose on the computer, I want to revise by hand. If I compose by hand, then I will revise some on the computer, but I do find it gives me a new perspective and a different way of feeling the composition of the piece.
Thank you all. I loved those different ways of working. Yeah, it's always just nice and helpful to hear some different perspectives of working when you feel stuck. So I loved all the different ideas. Thank you.
sure. Great question.
Thanks for asking.
And I hadn't thought at all of situational constraints, like you mentioned, Matt. So those are really interesting to work with, which I haven't done in that way. I don't know if you all know C.A. Conrad. Do you know that poet? Kristi, do you know the mode that he works in? It's like
Somatic, yeah. The somatic writing practice.
Yeah, so it reminded me of some of the stuff that he does, that they do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
In music, it's very interesting. It's a very different process than in writing. When you go in to start working on a project, often in the music world, the artist pairs with the role they call a producer, who basically comes in as a co-artist, and they're there to guide and be a sounding board, and oftentimes an in real time editor and also co-creator of the project. And those relationships change from project to project, and some are more resonant than others. But they're a person that's imbued with an immense amount of power over the creative process and over the finished work itself. And I think the closest thing to that in the literary world is an editor, which in my experience, they often kind of come in towards the back part of the project and the process, so there's here's my book, and then they kind of help you shape it up. And I've always been curious what it would be like to, as a poet, start a project with a producer and say, okay, we're going to make a book together, and empower an individual who has skills that are complementary to yours and looks at the world in a different way, and say, I'm giving you the ability and the permission to knife up my work and challenge me and push me and do your thing to it, and see what you end up with and what that process is like. Because you don't hear about it often in the literary world, but in the music world, it's the status quo, and it's the anomaly is when an artist does everything all by themselves. So I think even from discipline to discipline, there's lots to be taken from and learned about new avenues to explore with the process. And then again, if it gets you to that magic place where you have lightning in your blood, then doesn't matter what it looks like, really, I don't think.
Thank you for that.
All right. I think that's a pretty good note to close on. So I'm gonna go ahead and first off stop the recording.